The punch bowl cracked before anyone noticed I was breaking too. Lena Hart stood at the edge of the Ashwood gathering hall, a glass in her hand she had stopped drinking from 10 minutes ago. The music was loud, the fire in the stone pit was loud, but none of it was as loud as the sound of Rourke laughing at something Sable had just whispered in his ear. Lena had been Rourke's maid-in-waiting for 2 years. 2 years of standing beside him at pack meetings. 2 years of learning the names of every wolf in Ashwood, every child, every elder, every rule written and unwritten. 2 years of believing that patience was the same thing as love. She watched Sable's hand rest on Rourke's arm like it had always belonged there. Sable had grown up in Ashwood before moving away as a teenager. Everyone said she and Rourke had been close once, the kind of close that never gets a name because both people are too young to name it. Now Sable was back, dressed in deep green, her laugh carrying across the hall like she owned the air in it. Sable had arrived only an hour earlier, sweeping into the gathering hall with the easy confidence of someone who had never once doubted her welcome anywhere. Rourke had crossed the room to greet her before Lena had even registered who she was, his voice rising half an octave in a way Lena had never heard him use for her, warm and eager in a way that made the back of her neck prickle with something she did not yet have a name for. "You remember Sable," Rourke had said, drawing Lena over almost as an afterthought, his hand barely touching her back. "We grew up together, practically family." Sable's eyes had swept over Lena once, quick and assessing, the way someone might glance at furniture they were deciding whether to keep. "Of course," Sable had said, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. "The human. I've heard so much." Lena had smiled back, polite, practiced, the way she had learned to smile through 2 years of small comments about her blood and her place in a world that was not originally built for her. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself that 3 times before the joke came, before Rourke's laugh landed like a verdict in front of the entire hall, before she understood that Sable's arrival had not been the beginning of the humiliation at all. It had only been the spark. Then Rourke turned to her, in front of at least 30 pack members, and said the words that would end everything. "Lena doesn't really get our jokes," he said, smiling at Sable, not at her. "She's not exactly one of us. More like a guest who stayed too long." The hall went quiet the way a held breath goes quiet. Someone laughed. It might have been Sable. It might have been someone trying to be kind to Rourke by laughing at his joke. Lena would never know, because in that moment she stopped hearing individual sounds and started hearing only the ringing in her own ears. Nearby, a young wolf named Grace, one of the few pack members who had ever gone out of her way to be kind to Lena, looked down at her own hands, clearly unwilling to meet Lena's eyes. An older man named Martin, one of the pack elders who had once told Lena she reminded him of his own late wife, cleared his throat and looked away toward the fire pit, suddenly very interested in the flames. Nobody defended her. Nobody said a word in her favor. That silence, Lena would realize later, hurt in a way that was different from Rourke's joke itself. Quieter but somehow deeper. The particular ache of realizing that 2 years of small kindnesses had never translated into anyone standing beside her when it mattered. She looked for Rourke's mother, Claire, who had always treated her with careful, distant politeness, and found the older woman watching the scene with an expression Lena could not quite read, something between discomfort and resignation, as though this were not the first time she had watched her son choose an audience over a person who deserved better. She was human. Everyone knew that. It had never been a secret, but it had also never been a joke, not from him, not in front of everyone he led. Lena did not cry. She had promised herself a long time ago that she would not give anyone the satisfaction of watching her fall apart in public. Instead, she looked down at the punch bowl on the table beside her. It had a small crack running along its side, thin as a hair, the kind of crack you would never notice unless you were looking for something else to look at. She stared at that crack like it held the answer to a question she had not asked yet. "Careful," Rourke said, still smiling, still looking at Sable more than at her. "You'll break something staring at it like that." The words landed exactly like he meant them to. Lena set her glass down without a sound. She did not throw it. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned and walked toward the door, her steps even, her spine straight, while 30 pairs of eyes and Rourke's laughter followed her out. Outside, the night air hit her face like a slap that did not sting until seconds later. She kept walking. The ashwood grounds stretched wide around the gathering hall, bordered by a dark tree line that most humans would never dare enter alone at night. Lena was not most humans. She had lived among wolves long enough to know the smell of danger, and right now, the only danger she could smell was the shame still burning under her skin. She did not decide to walk into the forest. Her legs simply carried her there, while her mind was still back in that hall, replaying the sound of his laugh. Branches caught at her sleeves. The ground sloped downward, then up again. She walked without a destination, only a direction, which was away. Away from Rourke, away from Sable's green dress and easy laugh, away from 2 years of telling herself that being tolerated was the same as being wanted. The trees thinned eventually, and Lena realized she had crossed further than she meant to. The ashwood scent markers, the invisible lines that told any wolf where one pack's land ended, had faded behind her. She was standing in territory that did not belong to Rourke. She was standing in Blackthorn land. Every pack member in Ashwood had grown up hearing about the Blackthorn pack the way children grow up hearing about storms. Something to respect, something to avoid. Rourke had spoken of their alpha, a man named Cal Reyes, with a kind of stiffness that told Lena there was history there, old and unspoken, long before she had ever met either of them. She should have turned back. A low growl rolled out of the darkness to her left, close enough that Lena felt it in her chest before she consciously registered the sound. She froze. A shape moved between the trees, low to the ground, eyes catching a stray beam of moonlight. Not one of Rourke's pack, not anyone she recognized, a rogue wolf, unclaimed by any territory, drawn by the smell of a lone human wandering too far from safety. Lena's mind emptied of everything except one instinct: do not run. The wolf circled once, slow, testing. Lena kept her eyes down, her body still, every lesson she had ever half listened to about wolf behavior suddenly rising up sharp and useful in her memory. Running triggered chase. Chase triggered instinct. Instinct, out here, alone, in the dark, would not end well for her. The growl came again, lower this time, closer. Then, without warning, another shape crashed through the undergrowth, faster and larger, placing itself directly between Lena and the rogue wolf before either of them had time to react. A second growl followed, deeper, unmistakably a challenge rather than a threat, and the rogue wolf's ears flattened instantly against its skull. Lena did not see the fight so much as feel it, a blur of motion and sound lasting only seconds before the rogue wolf yelped once and bolted back into the trees, tail low, gone as quickly as it had appeared. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by Lena's own ragged breathing. The figure that had appeared turned toward her, still catching his own breath, and in the pale moonlight Lena saw him shift, the broad shoulders and dark fur smoothing back into the shape of a man standing tall and unbothered in front of her, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. "You're bleeding," he said, nodding toward her arm, where a branch had scraped her skin sometime during her blind walk through the trees. "It's nothing," Lena managed, her voice thinner than she intended. "Thank you, whoever you are." "You're a long way from Ashwood," he said, low, even, unhurried, the voice of a man simply stating a fact rather than announcing a threat. "You should sit before your legs decide for you. That scrape needs looking at." Lena's legs, it turned out, had already made up their mind. She lowered herself onto a fallen log nearby, suddenly aware of how loudly her own heartbeat sounded in her ears, now that the danger had passed and left only the shaking behind. "I know I'm trespassing," she said. "I'll go, once I can feel my hands again." "You don't have to." She studied him properly now that the immediate danger had passed. In the dim moonlight, dark hair, a face built more for stillness than for smiling. He did not step closer than necessary. He did not step away either. "Are you going to tell me who you are?" she asked. "Cal," he said, "this is my land." Lena felt something cold move through her chest. Of course, the one night she stumbled blindly through a forest, she would land at the feet of the one Alpha Rourke had spent 2 years warning her about. "Then I'm trespassing," she said. "I'll leave." "You're not a threat to anyone here," Cal said. "You can stay until you're ready to go back." "I'm not going back." She had not meant to say it out loud. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him, though his face barely moved to show it. "Ashwood business isn't mine," Cal said carefully. "But something happened tonight. I can smell it on you. Shame doesn't wash off easy." Lena laughed, short and humorless. Bless his heart. He couldn't have just broken up with me quietly. He had to do it in front of 30 people, with an audience he was trying to impress. Cal said nothing. He did not ask who the audience was. He did not ask what Rourke had said. Somehow, his silence felt more respectful than any question could have. He walked a few steps away, gathered a handful of dry branches, and began building a small fire without asking her permission or waiting for hers. "You don't have to do that," Lena said. "You're cold," Cal said simply. "And it's a long walk back to anywhere from here." She watched him work, his hands steady, unbothered, like this was the most normal thing in the world. In a strange way, it was the first calm moment she had felt all night. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. And Rourke would probably burn this whole forest down if he knew I was sitting at your fire." "Rourke and I have never needed a reason to dislike each other," Cal said, the faintest edge entering his voice for the first time. "But that's old business. Nothing to do with you." He did not explain further. Lena did not ask him to. The fire caught, small and orange against the dark, and for a while neither of them spoke. Lena stared into the flames instead of the crack in a punch bowl, and found she liked this fixation better. At least this one gave off warmth. "You should know," Cal said eventually, "that whatever he said to you tonight, it wasn't about you at all. Men like that don't humiliate the people they value. They humiliate the people they're afraid of losing control over." Lena looked up at him, startled by how close that landed to something true. "That almost sounded like sympathy," she said. "Don't get used to it," Cal said, and for the first time, something close to a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "I'm not known for being soft." "Bless your heart," Lena muttered. "Neither am I, apparently, since I just walked 2 miles into enemy territory in party shoes." Cal glanced down at her shoes, thin-strapped and entirely wrong for a forest floor, and this time the smile reached both corners of his mouth. "You can stay by the fire," he said. "Nobody here will touch you. Blackthorn doesn't hunt guests." "I'm not a guest," Lena said. "I'm an accident." "Then you're an accident who's welcome to stay until morning." Lena wrapped her arms tighter around her knees and watched the flames climb higher, thinking of the crack in that punch bowl, thinking of Rourke's laugh, thinking of the easy way Sable's hand had rested on his arm like it had always belonged there. She thought, too, of how strange it was that the enemy's fire felt warmer than 2 years inside Rourke's pack ever had. Somewhere behind her, deep in Ashwood territory, Rourke was probably still laughing, still charming Sable, still convinced that Lena would come crawling back once her pride wore thin. He had no idea she was already gone. The forest around Cal's fire was quiet, except for the soft crackle of burning wood and the distant call of some night bird settling into its roost. Lena had expected Blackthorn land to feel dangerous, the way Rourke had always described it, full of wolves who followed no rules and answered to no one. Instead, it felt strangely still, almost peaceful, like a held breath finally let out. "You're staring at the fire like it owes you money," Cal said. Lena blinked, pulled out of her thoughts. "Sorry, bad night. I gathered that much." She pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly aware of how thin her dress was against the cool night air. Cal noticed, though he said nothing about it directly. Instead, he shrugged off the heavy jacket he wore and held it out to her without ceremony. "I'm fine," Lena said automatically. "You're shaking." She realized he was right. Whether it was the cold or the aftershock of the evening, her hands would not stay still. She took the jacket, murmured a thank you, and pulled it around her shoulders. It smelled like wood smoke, and something clean, like cedar. "So," Cal said, settling onto a rock across from her, "are you going to tell me what actually happened tonight, or are we going to keep talking about punch bowls and party shoes?" Lena let out a breath. "There isn't much to tell. 2 years of my life, undone in about 10 seconds, in front of everyone who was supposed to matter. That's not nothing." "It's embarrassing," Lena said. "That's what it is. I gave up things for that pack. My old life, my old friends, and the whole time, apparently, I was just a guest who stayed too long." Saying the words out loud again made her stomach twist, but it also made something else happen. Something small and unexpected. Saying it here, to a stranger who owed Rourke nothing, and owed her nothing either, made it feel less like a wound and more like a fact she could eventually carry without flinching. "For what it's worth," Cal said, "I've known Rourke a long time. Longer than you have. He's always needed an audience more than he's needed the truth. You sound like you know him well. Better than either of us would like." Lena studied him again in the firelight. There was history there, clearly, something old and complicated that Cal was choosing not to explain, and something in her respected that restraint more than she expected to. Rourke would have used the opening to tell a long story about himself. Cal simply let the silence sit. "I should go," Lena said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "I'm sure Blackthorn doesn't want an Ashwood problem sitting at its fire all night. You let me worry about what Blackthorn wants." That almost sounded like an order. "It was an observation," Cal said, "delivered by someone who happens to be in charge." Despite everything, Lena felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. It was the first time all night that anything had come close to feeling like relief. They sat in silence a while longer, the fire slowly burning down to embers, until Lena finally admitted to herself that walking back to Ashwood territory in the dark, in party shoes, still raw from humiliation, was not a plan at all. It was just running with extra steps. "Is there somewhere I could stay?" she asked quietly. "Just until it's light." Cal studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something she could not see. "There's a cabin near the northern ridge," he said. "It's used for pack elders who need quiet. You'd be safe there. Nobody will bother you. And you? Are you going to bother me?" "I don't chase what doesn't ask to be caught," Cal said simply, and something about the plainness of it settled the last of the nervous energy in Lena's chest. She followed him through the trees, the borrowed jacket heavy and warm around her shoulders, the last of Rourke's laughter finally growing quiet in her memory, replaced by the steady, even sound of footsteps beside her own. By the time they reached the cabin, tucked against the ridge with a single lit lantern hanging by the door, Lena understood something she had not expected to learn tonight. Humiliation had a way of making a person feel smaller, but somehow, walking beside a stranger who asked for nothing and offered warmth without conditions, Lena felt, for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, like she was still a person worth walking beside. She did not know yet what tomorrow would bring, whether Rourke would come looking for her, whether Blackthorn would truly welcome an outsider from a rival pack. But for tonight, under a lantern light on land that was not hers, Lena finally let herself breathe. The cabin door closed behind her with a soft click, and outside, the last embers of Cal's fire settled quietly into the dark. Morning light came through a thin curtain, and for a moment, Lena forgot where she was. Then she remembered the fire, the jacket still draped over her shoulders, the sound of Rourke's laughter that had chased her 2 miles through the dark. She sat up slowly, the cabin quiet around her, a kettle already warm on a small stove, though she had heard no one enter. She found Cal outside, sitting on the porch steps, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes, as though he had been waiting for her without needing to check the time. "You didn't have to make tea," Lena said. I didn't, Cal said. Nora did. She runs this cabin for the elders. She heard there was a guest and decided you needed feeding before anything else. As if summoned, a woman appeared in the doorway, gray hair pulled back, sharp eyes that studied Lena the way a grandmother studies a stray cat, before deciding whether to keep it. Nora said nothing, only nodded once, and disappeared back inside, leaving behind the smell of something baking. She likes you, Cal said. How can you tell? She didn't ask any questions. That's Nora's version of approval. Lena almost laughed. It had been so long since laughter came easily that the sound surprised her on the way out. The morning passed in small, quiet moments. Nora fed her more than she could finish. A boy named Peter, no older than 10, ran past the porch twice, chasing a dog 3 times his size, and both times he stopped just long enough to stare at Lena with open curiosity, before running off again. They're not used to Ashwood faces, Cal said, watching her watch the boy. I'm not exactly an Ashwood face anymore, Lena said. I'm the guest who stayed too long, remember. You said that like it still stings. It does. Cal did not offer comfort, and somehow that felt more honest than if he had. He simply let the words sit in the morning air, unchallenged, until Lena found she did not need him to fix anything. She only needed him to hear it. By afternoon, word had clearly spread through the Blackthorn grounds that an outsider was staying near the ridge, and curiosity turned into something closer to welcome. A young woman named Ellie, sharp-tongued and quick to smile, found Lena by the well, and immediately declared that no one dressed for a forest should be forced to walk in party shoes for one more day. Come on, Ellie said, tugging Lena's sleeve. We'll find you boots that actually work. I don't want to be any trouble. Too late, Ellie said cheerfully. You crossed into Blackthorn land in shoes made of string and hope. You've already been trouble. Might as well enjoy it. Lena laughed again, easier this time, and let herself be pulled along. The Blackthorn pack was rougher than Ashwood in almost every visible way. The buildings were simpler, the laughter louder, the rules looser around the edges. But there was a warmth here that Lena had not expected, an ease between people who did not seem interested in ranking each other by bloodline or polish. Ellie handed her a pair of worn boots that fit well enough, then insisted on teaching her something Lena never imagined she would need to know. Every Blackthorn woman learns to throw a knife, Ellie said, pressing the handle into Lena's palm. Doesn't matter if you're pack or guest. Around here, we don't wait for someone else to protect us. Lena's first 3 throws missed the target entirely. Her 4th one hit the outer edge, and Ellie whooped like she had won a prize. See, Ellie said, Ashwood taught you to smile pretty and stand quiet. We're teaching you to stand for yourself. The words settled somewhere deep in Lena's chest, quiet but permanent, like a small stone dropped into still water. That evening, Cal found her sitting on the porch again, boots on her feet instead of thin straps, a faint bruise forming on her palm from gripping the knife too hard all afternoon. Ellie's been busy, he said. She's terrifying, Lena said. I like her. Most people do, once they survive an afternoon with her. They sat together as the sun dropped low over the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange that reminded Lena, briefly, and without pain this time, of the fire from the night before. Can I ask you something? Lena said. You can ask. Why do you and Rourke hate each other so much? He's never told me the real story. Just old grudges, family history, nothing specific. Cal was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon rather than on her. Blood before either of us could grow into it, he said finally. That's all you need to know for now. Lena did not push further. She had learned enough about restraint over the last day to recognize it in someone else, and she respected that Cal offered only what he chose to offer, nothing forced, nothing performed for effect. 3 days passed that way, quiet and unhurried. Lena learned the names of children who ran barefoot past the cabin each morning. She learned that Nora's bread was better than anything she had eaten in 2 years at Ashwood. She learned that Ellie's sharp tongue hid a fierce loyalty, and that Peter, the boy with the oversized dog, had lost his mother the previous winter and had quietly decided that Lena's kindness reminded him of her. None of this healed the humiliation from that first night completely, but it dulled the sharpest edge of it, replaced slowly by something steadier, something that felt less like hiding and more like rebuilding. On the third evening, a messenger arrived at the edge of Blackthorn territory, an Ashwood wolf named Daniel, young and clearly uncomfortable to be standing on land that was not his own. "Rourke wants her back," Daniel said, addressing Cal rather than Lena, as though she were an object to be returned, rather than a person who might have an opinion of her own. "She's not a package," Cal said evenly. "She can answer for herself." Daniel looked at Lena properly for the first time since arriving. "He says it's time to come home," Daniel said. "He says whatever happened was a misunderstanding. He says the pack misses you." Lena thought of the punch bowl. She thought of the crack running along its side, thin and easy to miss unless you were looking for something else to focus on. She thought of Rourke's laugh, aimed at her, timed for an audience. "Tell him," Lena said, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her, "that I'm not confused about what happened. And tell him I'm not coming back." Daniel's eyes widened slightly, clearly unprepared for a refusal delivered so calmly. "He won't like that answer," Daniel said. "He didn't like a lot of things," Lena said. "That's not my problem to solve anymore." Daniel left without another word, disappearing back through the trees toward Ashwood territory, and Lena felt something settle in her chest that she had not felt in longer than 2 years. Not triumph exactly, something quieter, something closer to peace. Cal watched her carefully after Daniel disappeared from view. "That took courage," he said. "It took 3 days of Ellie teaching me to throw knives and Nora feeding me more bread than any human should eat," Lena said. "Courage is easier when you're not standing alone." "You weren't standing alone the first night either," Cal said. "You just hadn't noticed yet." Lena looked at him, at the steady, unhurried way he watched her, at the jacket still hanging by the cabin door where she had left it, still smelling faintly of wood smoke and cedar. She did not answer him directly. She only sat beside him on the porch steps as the last light faded from the sky, and for the first time since the gathering hall, she let herself imagine a version of her life that did not begin and end with what Rourke thought of her. On the second night, unable to sleep, Lena walked down to the stream that ran along the edge of the Blackthorn grounds, drawn by the sound of water over stone. She did not expect anyone else to be awake at that hour, and she nearly turned back when she saw a figure seated on the bank, knees drawn up, staring at the current. It was not Cal. It was Ellie. "Can't sleep either," Ellie said, without turning around, as though she had heard Lena's footsteps long before seeing her. "No," Lena admitted, sitting down a careful distance away. "Too much in my head." "That happens, first few nights, somewhere new," Ellie said, "especially after somewhere old decides it doesn't want you anymore." Lena flinched slightly at the bluntness of it, but there was no cruelty in Ellie's tone, only the plain honesty that seemed to run through everyone in Blackthorn like a second bloodline. "How long have you lived here?" Lena asked. "My whole life," Ellie said. "Born here, never wanted to leave. Some people think that makes me small-minded. I think it makes me lucky. Not everyone gets to know exactly where they belong. I thought I knew, once," Lena said quietly. 2 years of thinking I belonged somewhere. Turns out I was just convenient, until someone more interesting walked back into the room." Ellie was quiet for a moment, watching the water. "You know what I noticed," she said eventually, "the first time I saw you throw that knife and miss by a mile." "That I'm terrible at it?" "That you didn't quit," Ellie said. "Most people who've had 2 years of being told they don't belong somewhere would have packed it in after the first bad throw. You threw 4 more times before you hit anything." Lena felt something tighten in her throat, unexpected and sudden. "I'm not used to people noticing things like that," she said. "Get used to it," Ellie said. "Blackthorn notices. That's the whole point of a pack. Nobody gets to disappear into the crowd here, for better or worse. They sat together by the stream a while longer, until the sky began to lighten faintly at the edges, and Lena found that some of the weight she had carried since the gathering hall had eased simply from being heard by someone who expected nothing from her in return. The days that followed settled into an easy rhythm. Mornings began with Nora's bread, still warm, always too much of it, pressed into Lena's hands whether she asked for it or not. Afternoons belonged to Ellie, who treated knife-throwing lessons less like training and more like an ongoing argument about Lena's posture, her grip, her habit of flinching before the blade even left her hand. "Stop apologizing to the target," Ellie said, more than once. "It's wood. It doesn't care about your feelings." By the 5th day, Lena's aim had improved enough that she hit the center twice in a row, and Ellie declared it worthy of celebration, dragging her toward the kitchen to steal a loaf of bread still too hot to eat properly. Evenings, more often than not, belonged to Cal. He never announced his presence the way Rourke used to, never made an entrance designed to be noticed. He simply appeared, on the porch, by the fire, near the well, wherever Lena happened to be, and stayed as long as she wanted him to, and not a moment longer than that. "You don't talk much about yourself," Lena said one evening, watching him work a whetstone slowly against the edge of his knife. "Not much to say," Cal said. "I lead. I protect what's mine to protect. The rest is just noise." "That's a very tidy answer for someone whose land I fell into by accident." Cal's mouth twitched, close to a smile. "Fine. I had a brother once. Younger. He and Rourke grew up close, before things went wrong between our packs. That's most of what you need to know about the history you keep asking after." Lena did not push further, sensing the same restraint she had recognized in him from the first night, the sense that some wounds were his to carry quietly rather than hers to unpack. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Whatever happened?" "It was a long time ago," Cal said, "before either of us grew into the people we are now." He was quiet for a moment, turning the whetstone over in his hands, and then, surprising her, he continued. "My brother's name was Owen," Cal said. "He and Rourke ran together as boys, before either of them understood what it meant to lead anyone. There was a border dispute, nothing that should have mattered, a strip of land neither pack truly needed. Owen went out to settle it quietly, the way young wolves sometimes do when they want to prove themselves before they're ready. Rourke was supposed to meet him halfway. He didn't come." Lena said nothing, sensing that the story needed room to breathe rather than questions to fill the silence. "Owen ran into trouble alone that night," Cal said. "The kind of trouble two wolves could have walked away from easily, and one couldn't. Rourke says he was delayed. Maybe he was. It doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change that Owen never made it home." "I'm sorry," Lena said quietly. "That's not old business at all, is it? That's just a wound that hasn't been given time to close." "Some wounds don't close," Cal said. "They just stop bleeding long enough to be carried without falling apart. That's most of what I've made peace with." "Is that why you and Rourke have hated each other all these years? Because of what happened to Owen?" "Rourke never apologized," Cal said simply. "Not once, in all these years. He told himself a story where he was blameless, and he's been performing that story for anyone who'll watch ever since. I imagine that's part of why he needed Sable's attention so badly the night he humiliated you. Some men can't stand being alone with the truth about themselves, so they keep finding new audiences to distract them from it." Lena felt something settle into place, a piece of the picture she had been missing since that first night by the fire, when Cal had said only that it was blood before either of them could grow into it. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You didn't have to." "I wanted you to understand," Cal said, "that this isn't really about you, or about territory, or about who gets to be alpha of what. It's about a man who spent a decade running from something he did, and dressing it up as an old rivalry, so he never has to sit with what it actually cost." The words echoed something he had told her that first night by the fire, and Lena realized, sitting there in the fading light, that Cal measured his trust the way most people measured currency, slowly, deliberately, never spending more than the moment called for. It made the moments he did offer feel heavier, more real, than anything Rourke had ever handed her freely, and without thought. On the fourth night, Lena woke gasping, the cabin dark around her heart slamming against her ribs for no reason she could immediately name. The dream had already begun fading, but the feeling stayed, sharp and specific, the sensation of standing in the gathering hall again, with 30 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and Rourke's laugh ringing louder than it had even in memory. She sat up, pressed her palms flat against the cool wooden floor, and tried to steady her breathing the way Ellie had shown her to steady her aim before a throw. It did not work immediately. Instead of fear, something else rose up to meet the panic, familiar in a way that almost startled her. Anger. Not the sharp, hot kind that burned out fast, but a low, steady kind, the sort that settled into her bones like heat from a fire she had built herself. She thought of Rourke's smile, aimed at Sable, timed for effect, and felt the anger wrap around the fear like a blanket, dulling its edges until she could breathe normally again. It was, strangely, a relief. Anger asked nothing of her except to exist. Fear asked her to shrink. She chose the anger every time it was offered, the way a person reaches for a familiar coat on a cold morning without needing to think about it. She did not go back to sleep. Instead, she pulled Cal's borrowed jacket around her shoulders, the one that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and cedar, though she had long since stopped needing an excuse to wear it, and stepped out onto the porch to watch the dark settle over the tree line. Cal found her there sometime later, unsurprised, as though some part of him had known she would not stay asleep that night. "Bad dream," he said. It was not a question. "The gathering hall," Lena said. Rourke laughing. Except this time everyone in the room was laughing too, and I couldn't find the door. Cal sat down beside her without asking permission, close enough that she could feel the steady warmth of him beside her in the cold air. "You don't have to explain it further," he said. "I'm not going to ask you to relive it in more detail just so I understand it better." Lena felt something loosen in her chest, some knot she had not realized she was still carrying. "I keep waiting to stop being angry about it," she admitted. "Like there's supposed to be a day where I wake up and it doesn't matter anymore." "Maybe there is," Cal said. "Or maybe the anger just becomes something you know how to carry, instead of something that carries you. Either way works, in my experience." "That's oddly comforting, coming from someone who doesn't do comfort." "Don't get used to it," Cal said, and there it was again, the same faint curve at the corner of his mouth that she had come to look for without meaning to. They sat together until the sky began to lighten at the edges, neither of them speaking further, the silence between them doing more work than words could have managed. On the sixth evening, disaster arrived in the small, ordinary shape of Peter's enormous dog knocking over a lantern near the woodpile. The flames caught fast, faster than anyone expected, licking up the side of dry stacked wood before Lena had even fully understood what was happening. Shouts rang out across the yard. Someone grabbed buckets. Ellie appeared out of nowhere, barking orders with more authority than Lena had ever heard from her. Lena found herself moving before she consciously decided to, grabbing the nearest bucket, falling into a line passing water hand to hand toward the fire, her thin arms burning with effort long before the flames finally died down to smoke and ruin. When it was over, the woodpile was a blackened mess, but nothing worse had been lost, no cabins touched, no one hurt beyond a few singed sleeves and Peter's tearful apologies for his dog's clumsiness. Cal found her afterward, soot smudged across one cheek, her hands raw from gripping the bucket handle too tightly. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I live here now," Lena said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "That's what people do when something they live in catches fire." Cal studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. "You said that like you'd already decided," he said. "Maybe I had," Lena admitted. "Somewhere between Ellie's knife lessons and Nora's bread and you not asking me for anything I couldn't give." Neither of them said anything else about it that night, but something had shifted, quiet and unspoken, settling into place the way the last piece of a puzzle settles without announcement. It did not take long for word to spread that Lena had refused to return, and it took even less time for Rourke to decide that a messenger's answer was not good enough for him. The night before he arrived, something moved along the border that had nothing to do with words. Lena woke to raised voices outside the cabin, low and urgent, followed by the sound of running feet across the yard. She pulled on Cal's jacket and stepped outside to find torches moving along the tree line at the edge of Blackthorn land, three shapes barely visible in the dark, testing the boundary the way a hand tests a locked door. Ellie appeared at her side almost instantly, a knife already in her hand, her usual easy humor entirely absent. "Ashwood Scouts," Ellie said quietly. "Rourke's checking how many teeth we've got before he decides how loud to bark tomorrow." "Should I be worried?" Lena asked, watching the torches shift and pause near the tree line. "You should be ready," Ellie said. "There's a difference." Cal was already moving toward the border before Lena had finished processing what was happening, flanked by two other wolves who fell into step beside him without needing instructions. Lena watched from the porch, her hands cold despite the jacket, as the torches at the tree line halted at the sight of Blackthorn's response and then, after a long, tense moment, withdrew back into Ashwood territory without a single word exchanged. Cal returned sometime later, his expression unreadable in the dark. "They didn't cross," he said, before she could ask. "They wanted to see if we'd flinch." "Did we?" "Blackthorn doesn't flinch," Cal said. "Not for scouts, not for anyone." Lena felt her pulse finally begin to slow, the sharp edge of adrenaline giving way to something closer to exhaustion. "He's going to come himself tomorrow, isn't he?" she said. It was not really a question. "Probably," Cal said. "Men like Rourke don't send scouts to test a border unless they're already planning to walk it themselves." "I'm not afraid of him," Lena said, and found, to her own surprise, that it was true. "I know," Cal said. "That's exactly why he'll lose, whatever tomorrow looks like." Neither of them slept much that night, though neither admitted it to the other, both keeping a quiet, watchful vigil until the sky began to pale toward morning. 4 days after the gathering, he came to the border himself. Lena heard the commotion before she saw it, raised voices near the tree line where Blackthorn's scent markers met open ground. She recognized the tone instantly, that particular blend of confidence and impatience that Rourke wore like a second skin. By the time she reached the clearing, a small crowd had already gathered, Ellie standing tense near the front, Peter's dog barking somewhere behind the cabins. Rourke stood at the border with 3 of his own pack behind him, and beside him, dressed in deep green again, was Sable, her expression somewhere between amused and proprietary, as though she had come along simply to watch a show. "Lena," Rourke said, his voice pitched for an audience the way it always was. "You've made your point. Come home." "I'm not confused about where home is anymore," Lena said, and she was pleased to hear that her voice did not shake. "This isn't like you," Rourke said, "running off into enemy territory, making a scene." "I didn't make the scene," Lena said. "You did, in front of 30 people. I just walked away from it." Sable's mouth curved into something close to a smile, though she said nothing, clearly enjoying the tension more than she was willing to admit. "You look well," Rourke added, his eyes flicking briefly toward the borrowed boots on her feet, the jacket still hanging loose around her shoulders. "Blackthorn suits you, apparently. Rougher than what you're used to, I'd have thought." "Funny," Lena said. "I was about to say the same thing about myself. I look well, because nobody here has laughed at me in front of a crowd yet." A ripple of quiet amusement moved through the small knot of Blackthorn wolves who had gathered at the edge of the clearing, and Rourke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I came to talk sense into you," Rourke said, "not to be mocked in front of an audience of my own." "That's an interesting complaint," Lena said, "coming from the man who taught me exactly how that feels." Cal appeared then, stepping out from between 2 of the cabins, unhurried, his presence enough to shift the entire balance of the clearing without a single raised word. "You're on Blackthorn land," Cal said to Rourke, his voice even. "That means you're a guest, whether you like it or not." "This isn't your business, Reyes," Rourke said, and for the first time Lena heard the old history in his voice, sharp and personal, in a way that had nothing to do with her. "It became my business," Cal said, "the moment your former mate walked onto my land, cold and shaking, because your pack laughed at her in front of a woman you were trying to impress." The words landed hard, and Lena watched something flicker across Rourke's face, not quite shame, but close enough to it that he looked away first. "I never meant for it to go this far," Rourke said, his voice quieter now, aimed at Lena instead of the crowd. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes." "You didn't make a mistake," Lena said. "You made a choice. There's a difference. A mistake is an accident. What you did was timed. You knew exactly what you were saying and exactly who you were saying it for." Sable's smile finally faded, replaced by something more uncertain, as though she had not expected to be named so plainly as the audience Rourke had performed for. "I loved you," Rourke said, and Lena almost laughed at how easily the word came to him now, when it had been absent from his mouth for 2 years of quiet effort on her part and silence on his. "You loved being seen with me," Lena said. "There's a difference there too. I spent 2 years learning every name in your pack, every rule, every tradition, trying to earn a place that you never once made me feel safe in. And the one night someone more exciting walked back into your life, you decided I was disposable enough to laugh at." The clearing had gone very quiet. Even Peter's dog had stopped barking. Ellie stood with her arms crossed, watching Lena with something like pride. Nora had appeared at the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable, but her presence steady. "So that's it," Rourke said. "You're choosing him, my rival, just to spite me." "I'm not choosing anyone to spite you," Lena said. "I'm choosing myself. For the first time in 2 years, I'm choosing what makes me feel like a person instead of a guest." She did not look at Cal when she said it, though she felt his stillness beside her, steady as it had been from the very first night. Rourke opened his mouth to respond, but there was nothing left to say that would change the outcome, and something in his face seemed to recognize that even before Lena turned away. "This isn't over," Rourke said, though the words came out smaller than he clearly intended them to. "It is for me," Lena said, and she meant it completely. Sable said nothing at all. She simply turned and walked back toward the tree line, no longer smiling, no longer amused, and after a long, tense moment, Rourke followed her, his pack falling into step behind him, until the clearing was empty of Ashwood wolves entirely. Cal did not say anything for a while after they left. He simply stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the quiet steadiness radiating off him, the same stillness that had first drawn her attention on the night they met. "You didn't need me to say any of that," Cal said eventually. "No," Lena agreed, "but it helped, knowing you would have stood there with me either way." Ellie broke the silence first, letting out a low whistle. "Bless her heart," she said, grinning at Lena. "I don't think anyone has ever spoken to an alpha like that on Blackthorn land before." "I'm not exactly known for staying quiet anymore," Lena said, and for the first time since the gathering hall, her voice held nothing but certainty. The crowd slowly dispersed, Peter's dog resuming its chase around the yard, Nora disappearing back toward the kitchen to start on something that smelled like cinnamon, life continuing around her the way it always had, steady and unbothered by the storm that had just passed through. Lena stayed on the porch a while longer with Cal, watching the empty tree line where Rourke had disappeared, feeling lighter than she had in longer than she could remember. The following morning, before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, a lone figure appeared at the Blackthorn border, hands raised, clearly unarmed. It was Daniel, the same young messenger who had come days earlier demanding Lena's return. Ellie moved to intercept him, but Lena, recognizing the hesitant set of his shoulders, waved her off. "I'm not here for Rourke," Daniel said quickly, before anyone could ask. "He doesn't know I've come. I just wanted to say something, and I didn't have the courage to say it in front of him yesterday." "Say it then," Lena said. What he did to you, at the gathering, Daniel said, his eyes fixed somewhere near her feet rather than her face. It wasn't right. A lot of us knew it wasn't right, even while we were laughing along, because it felt safer than saying nothing. I've thought about it every day since. I'm sorry I didn't say anything that night. Lena studied him for a long moment, surprised by how much the apology, however late, however small, settled something in her that she had not realized was still unsettled. Thank you for saying it now, she said. Better late than never, I suppose. Ashwood isn't the same since you left, Daniel admitted. Rourke's harder to be around, shorter-tempered, Sable's long gone, and it's like he can't decide if he misses her or misses you more, and either way, he takes it out on whoever's closest. That's not my problem to fix anymore, Lena said, though not unkindly. I know, Daniel said. I didn't come here asking you to fix it. I just wanted you to know that not everyone back there thinks you were the guest who stayed too long. Some of us think you were the best thing that Pack had, and we let it slip away because we were too afraid to say so out loud. Lena felt something warm move through her chest, different from the anger that had steadied her through the weeks before, something closer to peace, settling into a wound she had not fully realized was still open. Take care of yourself, Daniel, she said. You too, he said, and after a moment's hesitation added, I think you already are. Taking care of yourself, I mean. Better than any of us managed to do for you. He left the way he came, quiet and unannounced, and Lena stood at the border a while longer, watching the empty tree line, feeling lighter than she had any right to expect from an apology that changed nothing practical about her life, and yet somehow changed everything about how she carried the memory of it. That night, once the yard had quieted and most of Blackthorn had drifted off to sleep, Lena found she could not settle. Her hands still trembled faintly, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer weight of having said, out loud, everything she had carried silently for 2 years. She sat on the cabin steps long after the lanterns had been put out, staring at nothing in particular. Nora found her there, wrapped in a blanket she had not asked for, and sat down beside her without a word, the way she did most things. You did well today, Nora said eventually. I don't feel like I did well, Lena admitted. I feel like I finally said something I should have said 2 years ago, and it still shakes me more than it should. That's how truth works, Nora said. It doesn't get lighter just because you finally speak it. It gets lighter because you stop carrying it alone. Lena looked over at her, surprised by the gentleness underneath Nora's usually brisk manner. Cal told you, Nora went on, before Lena could ask, that you weren't a package to be returned. He was right. But I'll tell you something he might not say himself. He hasn't stood at that border for anyone in a long time, not since his brother. Lena said nothing, letting the weight of that settle without pushing for more, the same restraint she had learned from Cal himself, now becoming a kind of second instinct. Get some sleep, Nora said, rising with a soft groan and pressing a hand briefly to Lena's shoulder. Tomorrow the bread still needs kneading, whether or not an alpha shows up at the border. Lena managed a tired laugh and finally let herself drift toward sleep sometime before dawn. In the days immediately following the confrontation, a strange quiet settled over Blackthorn, not tense, but watchful, as though the whole pack were waiting to see whether Rourke would return with more than words next time. Cal doubled the patrols along the border without making a show of it, and Lena noticed the change even though no one explained it to her directly. You're worried he'll come back, she said to Cal one evening, watching him check the edge of his knife out of habit rather than necessity. I'm careful, Cal corrected. There's a difference. Worried assumes I don't already know what I'd do if he tried. And what would you do? Whatever it took to make sure you never had to stand at that border alone again. The words were plain, unadorned, delivered without any attempt at drama, and somehow that made them land harder than anything more poetic could have. Word did drift back eventually, carried by traders who moved between territories without much loyalty to either side. Sable had left Ashwood within the week, as suddenly as she had returned, no explanation given, No farewell offered. Rourke, according to the same traders, had grown short-tempered with his own pack, quick to anger over small things, the kind of behavior that made even loyal wolves start to whisper among themselves. Lena felt surprisingly little when she heard it. Not satisfaction, not quite pity either, mostly a kind of distant recognition, the way one might look back at a house once lived in and feel nothing but relief at no longer being inside it. "You don't ask about him much," Ellie observed one afternoon, watching Lena's knife find the center of the target on the first try for the very first time. "There's not much left to ask," Lena said. "I already know how that story ends. I just didn't want to be a character in it anymore." Ellie grinned, tossing her own knife and catching it by the handle without looking. "Bless your heart. Look at you, talking like someone who's finally figured herself out." "I'm working on it," Lena said. "One bad throw at a time." Weeks passed after that, quiet and unremarkable in the best possible way. Lena settled into a rhythm at Blackthorn that had nothing to do with waiting for anyone's approval. She learned to throw a knife well enough that Ellie stopped laughing at her aim. She helped Nora in the kitchen most mornings, learning recipes that had been passed down through 3 generations of Blackthorn women. She let Peter's enormous dog knock her over exactly once, and decided that was enough to earn her a permanent place in the boy's affections. She did not see Rourke again. Word came occasionally through Blackthorn's border patrols that Ashwood had settled into a strange, quiet unease, that Sable had left again almost as suddenly as she arrived, that Rourke had grown short-tempered and distracted in the weeks since the confrontation. Lena found she felt very little about any of it. Not satisfaction, not regret. Simply distance, the kind that comes from finally closing a door instead of leaving it open a crack out of habit. Cal never pushed her toward anything. In the weeks that followed, he remained exactly what he had been from the first night, steady, unhurried, present without ever demanding attention. He walked with her sometimes in the evenings, when the light turned gold over the tree line. He never mentioned what had happened at the border again, never used it to claim any credit for the choice she had made. It was Lena, in the end, who chose to speak first. They were sitting at the long table in the main hall one evening, surrounded by the ordinary noise of pack life, Ellie arguing cheerfully with someone about whose turn it was to fix the well pump, Peter's dog stealing bread from an unattended plate, Nora shaking her head at the chaos, with the fondness of someone who had seen worse. "Cal," Lena said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask," he said, the same words he had offered on the porch weeks ago, still steady, still unchanged. "Why did you help me that first night? You didn't know me. You had every reason to send me back to Ashwood and let it be someone else's problem." Cal considered the question the way he considered most things, slowly, without rushing toward an easy answer. "Because you were sitting by yourself, staring into a fire, trying not to fall apart," he said. "And I remembered what that felt like, a long time ago, before I understood that the people who make you feel small are rarely the people worth staying for." "That almost sounded like more than sympathy," Lena said. "I told you not to get used to it." "I didn't listen." Cal's mouth curved, the same faint smile she had seen that first night by the fire, though now it reached further, settling into something warmer around his eyes. "Good," he said. "I was hoping you wouldn't." Lena felt something shift in her chest, not the sharp ache of humiliation she had carried out of that gathering hall weeks ago, but something steadier, something that felt less like being chosen and more like choosing. "I want to stay," she said, "not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I want to be." "You don't have to explain that to me," Cal said. "You've had a place here since the night Nora decided not to ask you any questions." Lena laughed, the sound easy now, familiar. Nothing like the humorless laugh she had let out that first night in the forest. One quiet afternoon, weeks into her new life at Blackthorn, Lena found herself walking alone toward the same stream where Ellie had once sat with her through a sleepless night. The water ran lower now, autumn thinning it toward the rocks beneath, and Lena settled onto the same bank, letting the sound of it wash over thoughts that no longer felt sharp enough to need drowning out. Cal found her there sometime later, as he so often seemed to, without ever making it feel like he was searching. "You come here a lot," he said, settling onto the bank beside her without asking permission, the way he had learned she preferred over formal invitations. "It's the first place here that felt like mine," Lena said. "Ellie found me here, that second night, when I couldn't sleep. It felt honest here. Nobody performing anything." "That's most of what I like about this land," Cal admitted. "Nothing here has to perform for anyone. It just is what it is." "Is that what you like about me?" Lena asked, half teasing, though something more serious sat underneath the question. Cal considered it the way he considered most things, slowly, without rushing toward an easy answer. "I like that you don't ask me to be anything other than what I am," he said. Rourke needed an audience to feel like himself. "You've never once asked me to be louder, or softer, or anything other than exactly this. I spent 2 years learning what happens when you ask someone to be something they're not," Lena said. "I'm not interested in doing that again, to anyone, especially not to myself." They sat together as the afternoon light slanted low through the trees, comfortable in a silence that asked nothing of either of them, until Cal reached over, carefully, and took her hand in his, an ordinary gesture that felt, somehow, larger than anything Rourke had ever declared in front of a crowded hall. "I'm not in a hurry," Cal said. "Whatever this becomes, it becomes on your timeline, not mine." "I know," Lena said. "That's exactly why I'm not afraid of it becoming something." They walked back together as the light faded, and it was only days later, in the noise and warmth of the pack hall, that Cal finally asked her the question that had clearly been sitting patiently behind everything he had not said at the stream. Peter chose that exact moment to slide onto the bench beside her, his dog's enormous head resting hopefully on Cal's boot, clearly angling for scraps. "Are you staying for good now?" Peter asked, with the blunt directness only a child could manage. "I think I am," Lena said. "Good," Peter said simply, as though the matter were now officially settled, and returned his attention to smuggling bread to his dog under the table. Ellie caught Lena's eye from across the hall and raised an eyebrow, tilting her head meaningfully toward Cal, who was pretending very hard not to notice the exchange. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away first, which only made Ellie grin wider. Later, walking back from the hall together, Cal stopped at the edge of the path where the trees opened onto a clear view of the stars, the same stretch of sky Lena had once stared at through a cracked cabin window on her very first night in Blackthorn. "I want to ask you something," Cal said, "and I want you to take your time answering it." "That sounds serious." "It is," he said. "I'm not Rourke. I won't perform this for an audience, and I won't ask you for anything you're not ready to give. But I've known for a while now that I don't want you to be a guest here anymore. I want you to be mine, if that's something you'd choose, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because it's what you actually want." Lena felt the weight of the question settle over her, warm rather than heavy, nothing like the cold, performative declarations she had grown used to expecting from love. "You already know my answer," she said. "You've known it since the fire caught the woodpile, and I didn't hesitate to help put it out." "I'd still like to hear it," Cal said. "Yes," Lena said simply. "I choose you, not because Rourke humiliated me into it. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because every single day since that first night, you've given me a reason to stay that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with feeling like myself again." Cal did not smile the way Rourke used to, wide and practiced for an audience. His smile was smaller, quieter, meant for her alone, and somehow that made it mean more than any performance ever could. Later, as the hall grew quieter and most of the pack drifted toward their homes, Lena reached across the table and took Cal's hand, plainly, without ceremony, in front of Ellie and Nora and anyone else who happened to be watching. It was such a small gesture, no audience gathered to witness it, no performance built around it, just 2 hands, resting together in the ordinary noise of an ordinary evening, chosen freely by both people involved. Word of the choice spread through Blackthorn faster than Lena expected, and within days Nora had decided, without asking anyone's permission, that the pack would mark the occasion properly. "We don't do anything the small way here," Ellie warned her, grinning, the morning of the gathering. "Hope you're ready." Lena was not entirely ready, but she found she did not need to be. The Blackthorn Hall filled that evening with more warmth than she had ever felt inside Ashwood's walls in 2 full years. Long tables pushed together and loaded with more food than seemed reasonable, Nora presiding over the kitchen like a general overseeing a campaign she fully intended to win. Peter's dog stole an entire loaf of bread within the first 10 minutes and suffered no consequences beyond a scolding it did not appear to take seriously. There was no elaborate ceremony, no long speeches, nothing performed for the sake of being watched. Cal simply stood at the head of the table when the meal quieted, and said, plainly, that Lena had earned her place among them, not through birth or bloodline, but through every ordinary day she had chosen to stay. "She fought a fire with a bucket instead of running from it," Cal said, "and she stood at our border and told an alpha the truth to his face without flinching. Blackthorn doesn't measure worth by what you were born into. We measure it by what you're willing to stand for." The hall erupted into the kind of cheer that had nothing polished about it. Ellie whooping loudest of all, Nora nodding once with quiet satisfaction, Peter banging his cup against the table until someone gently took it away from him. Lena felt heat rise in her face, unused to being celebrated rather than simply tolerated, and found that the unfamiliar feeling did not frighten her the way she expected it to. It simply felt, after everything, like something she was finally allowed to have. Later, when the noise had settled into the easy hum of a satisfied crowd, Cal found her near the door, the night air drifting in cool and clean behind her. "You didn't have to say all that," Lena said. "I didn't say it for you," Cal said. "I said it so nobody in that hall ever has reason to treat you like a guest who stayed too long." The echo of Rourke's old words, turned inside out and handed back to her transformed, settled something in Lena's chest that had been unsettled since the night of the gathering hall weeks ago. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't have to thank me for the truth," Cal said. They stepped outside together, the noise of the hall fading behind them, the stars stretched wide and undimmed over the Blackthorn Ridge. Lena thought, briefly, of Ashwood, of the gathering hall she had walked out of that first night, of the crack running along the side of a punch bowl she had stared at, rather than let herself fall apart in front of 30 watching faces. She did not need that crack to hide behind anymore. Later still, walking back toward the cabin under a sky full of stars, Lena thought of the crack in that punch bowl from the night everything changed. Thin and easy to miss unless you were looking for something else to focus on. She did not need to stare at cracks anymore. She had found, instead, something whole.